The best thing that has happened to me in the last 20 years, perhaps, is that as I look back at my
What happens when the smoothest voice in soul music refuses to play the game anymore? Behind the timeless hits and velvet falsetto was a man unraveling, fighting quiet battles with his label, his collaborators, and even himself. The night Marvin Gaye slammed his car door in Detroit, something within him shifted. It wasn't rage, not quite. It was something deeper, a crack that had grown too wide to ignore. Music, once his sanctuary, no longer gave him peace. Snow drifted across his windshield that winter evening in 1970, while inside, he sat with a notebook filled with words that refused to cooperate. He didn't know it yet, but those fragments would soon form a sonic manifesto that would reshape American consciousness. Marvin was never just a singer. He was a conduit for truth, but he was choking under the weight of his surroundings. 5 names loomed in his mind, figures who shaped his world yet stifled his spirit. At the top of the list was Diana Ross, Motown's crown jewel. Elegant, composed, magnetic. Yet her presence in the studio didn't inspire him, it constrained him. Around her, Marvin felt caged, but Ross was just one symbol among many. Other figures, collaborators more invested in polish than substance, icons who pulled focus and performers who stole oxygen, also haunted him. The Motown machine, which had once lifted him, now threatened to erase him. Berry Gordy, the architect of Motown, saw things clearly, through the lens of marketability. His mantra, "Just let the girls scream," wasn't advice to Marvin, it was a boundary. It told him to stay within the parameters of what was expected. No deviation, no personal truths that might disrupt the formula. Marvin knew he was feeding a system that didn't recognize the full extent of his artistry. That divide between the polished product and the man with a bleeding heart became unbearable. By 1970, Marvin was emotionally fractured. Tammy Terrell, his beloved duet partner, had fallen gravely ill. His brother Frankie had returned from Vietnam, spiritually shattered. The country itself was buckling under the weight of war, racial violence, and environmental collapse. In this turmoil, Marvin began writing something new, something risky. The result was What's Going On, an album of social commentary, spiritual longing, and personal grief. But when he brought the idea to Motown, Gordy dismissed it outright. Too heavy, too political, not commercial. Unwilling to compromise, Marvin covertly recorded the album on his own terms. He pulled in jazz musicians, gospel players, and improvisers, creating a sonic collage that merged soul, protest, and raw confession. He wasn't aiming for hits, he was exercising pain. When Gordy finally heard the tracks, he tried to suppress them, but Marvin stood firm. He threatened to walk away from recording altogether unless the title track was released. Motown relented. The single dropped in January of 1971, and it exploded. It reached number 1, 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and topped the R&B charts for 5 weeks, selling over 2 million copies. The full album followed in May, staying on the charts for 58 weeks and spawning 3 top 10 hits. Critics hailed it as prophetic. Rolling Stone later crowned it the greatest album of all time, and even in 2025 it remains in the pantheon of transformative music. But success came at a cost. Gordy's public praise was forced. The warmth between them cooled into quiet animosity. Marvin confided to friends that Gordy no longer saw him as an artist, but as a liability. Their conflict wasn't personal, it was generational. Marvin was rejecting the sanitized soul of the past in favor of unfiltered honesty. Motown tried one last time to bring Marvin back into the fold. In 1973, they proposed a duet album with Diana Ross. On paper, it was a dream pairing. In reality, it was combustible. Ross, pregnant and exacting, clashed with Marvin's spontaneous, unpredictable energy. He showed up late, smoked in the studio, and followed instinct over schedule. At one point, Ross walked out after he refused to put out a cigarette. He allegedly told Gordy, "If I can't smoke, I can't sing." The sessions were disjointed. The two barely recorded together, their vocals stitched together by engineers. There was no spark, no chemistry, just tension. Diana's precision met Marvin's chaos, and the result felt forced. Despite the disconnection, the album charted well. Their single "You're a Special Part of Me" hit number 1, 4 on the R&B chart, and cracked the top 20 on the pop chart. But the emotion wasn't there. It was a product, not a passion. What kept Marvin going wasn't spite. It was survival. He was bearing the weight of a nation's pain: systemic racism, war trauma, poverty, ecological decay. He didn't want to entertain, he wanted to awaken. Decades later, what's going on still resonates. On its 50th anniversary, artists like Neo and Kem reflected on its continued relevance, affirming Marvin's spiritual foresight. That Detroit night in 1970 wasn't about surrender, it was a spiritual reckoning. Marvin wasn't mourning fame or failure. He was shedding the final pieces of a role he never chose. In doing so, he gave America something it didn't know it needed: music as mirror and medicine. The disconnect with Ross lingered. Despite public smiles, there was no warmth behind the scenes. Their voices sounded beautiful together, but the emotional distance was unmistakable. One engineer recalled that Marvin and Diana never entered the booth at the same time. There was no fight, no reconciliation, just two stars moving in opposite directions, colliding briefly before parting for good. Marvin carried the exhaustion of constant contradiction. He wasn't angry, just weary. Even in the early years, sparks flew. In 1966, he and David Ruffin represented two poles of Motown: Marvin, the meticulous craftsman; Ruffin, the impassioned firebrand. Their rivalry reached its peak during a 1970 TV rehearsal, when David arrived hours late. Marvin snapped, "Want to go solo?" Ruffin retorted, "People wouldn't fall asleep if I did." No laughter followed. After that, their interactions dwindled to silence. When Ruffin died in 1991, Marvin didn't cry, but he remembered. "He sang with everything he had," he said. "That intensity was both a gift and a curse." Another battle brewed with producer Norman Whitfield. Whitfield, the mastermind behind Motown's psychedelic soul wave, tried to mold Marvin into his blueprint. He handed Marvin a rock-infused track in 1970, expecting compliance. Marvin declined. "I don't feel any soul in it." Their relationship fractured. Marvin wasn't interested in formulas. He wanted realness, ambient street sounds, imperfect vocals, raw emotion. Whitfield didn't understand. After a heated exchange, they stopped working together. Messages passed through intermediaries. Their collaboration died in fragments. Their tension echoed in, "I heard it through the grapevine." Whitfield pushed Marvin to sing in grueling keys, drawing out pain and passion at the cost of vocal strain. Berry Gordy initially rejected Marvin's version, opting to release the more upbeat Gladys Knight rendition first. Only later did Marvin's haunting take find its audience, and redefine soul music. That battle for artistic voice would become his legacy. Marvin's split with Whitfield marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. What's Going On wasn't just a record, it was a revolution. It dismantled the idea that Motown music had to comfort. Marvin insisted it could confront. Gordy hated the idea, but Marvin wasn't seeking permission. He was seeking purpose. And once the album hit shelves, even Whitfield couldn't deny its power. It was music as prayer, as protest, as prophecy. That defiance set Marvin free. He went on to release Let's Get It On, Here My Dear, and Midnight Love. Each album a further step away from Motown's assembly line. He stumbled at times, personally and professionally, but never lost his identity. Meanwhile, Whitfield continued shaping radio hits, but never again touched the emotional depths Marvin had reached. There was one last brush with greatness that never materialized. Quincy Jones, fresh off the wall and gearing up for Thriller, approached Marvin with a proposal. A collaboration fusing Marvin's falsetto with Quincy's sleek orchestration. Marvin declined, not out of disrespect, but from instinct. "I don't want perfection," he told a friend. "I want chaos. I want to sing before I even know the words." Quincy understood. He was music's most beautiful ghost, he later said. Their non-collaboration remains a symbol of mutual reverence. When Marvin died in 1984, Quincy sent a wreath with a note that read, "There was nothing wrong with the way you heard the world." It was the most fitting tribute from one genius to another. Marvin died in debt, nearly $9 million owed to the IRS, ex-spouses, and creditors. He lost properties in Los Angeles and Europe. Yet even in death, his legacy grew. Decades later, his estate earned millions from licensing, streaming, and royalties. His family famously won a $7.4 million lawsuit against Ed Sheeran for similarities to "Let's Get It On." Today, the Gaye estate is valued between $5 and $9 million. Not through opulence, but through careful stewardship of a timeless catalog. The silent tension between Marvin Gaye and Diana Ross following their duet album sessions spoke volumes, louder than any tabloid feud or dramatic fallout. While fans adored tracks like "My Mistake Was to Love You," those who were in the room knew something deeper was missing. It wasn't just about vocal harmony, it was about emotional connection. One engineer even recalled how the sessions were structured so that Diana and Marvin never had to share the same space. Diana would finish her takes, leave the studio, and only then would Marvin enter. There was no warmth between them, no meaningful exchange. Just two professionals fulfilling an obligation, their voices carefully stitched together across soundproof glass booths. For Marvin, the weight of expectation in those sessions was suffocating. It wasn't Diana's fault, he later confessed. She was simply more at ease with the polished, calculated world Motown demanded. He, on the other hand, had long since outgrown that world. Diana held her composure like armor, elegant, refined, rehearsed. But even her tone sometimes betrayed a subtle exhaustion, as if the emotional cost of perfection was finally beginning to show. Marvin didn't want to pretend anymore, and it showed in how he drifted further from Motown's polished mold. Their brief duet period ended without fanfare. No headlines, no screaming matches, just a quiet understanding that the chemistry Motown had banked on never really existed. Marvin returned to his private creative space, burning with questions that couldn't be answered in pre-written lyrics or photo shoots. What mattered now was honesty, sometimes beautiful, often brutal. Long before this breaking point, Marvin had already been forging silent rivalries within the Motown family. One of the most notable was with David Ruffin, the lead singer of The Temptations. In 1966, backstage before a Motown review, the atmosphere between them crackled with energy. Not admiration, but friction. Ruffin was pure emotional fire on stage, a loose cannon who sang like his heart might stop mid-note. Marvin, always more precise and thoughtful in performance, couldn't connect with Ruffin's volatile style. But deep down, perhaps he envied it too. The unfiltered release, the refusal to compromise. Their tension came to a head in 1970 during a televised rehearsal. Ruffin arrived late. Marvin, already agitated, quipped sarcastically, "Thinking of going solo, Dave?" Ruffin fired back, "At least no one falls asleep when I do." The room fell silent. After that, their relationship all but disappeared. They didn't share dressing rooms, didn't travel together, barely exchanged words. The potential for a creative alliance between two of Motown's most powerful male voices dissolved in bruised egos and wounded pride. When Ruffin passed away in 1991, Marvin didn't shed public tears. But he didn't forget either. According to friends, he quietly acknowledged Ruffin's gifts. He sang like it was his last breath every night. That kind of singing kills you eventually. Marvin's clashes didn't end there. His relationship with legendary producer Norman Whitfield, an architect of psychedelic soul, was equally combustible. Whitfield had reshaped the Motown sound with deep bass lines, layered arrangements, and socio-political undertones, particularly in his work with The Temptations. But Marvin resisted being molded. Whitfield believed in structure, in blueprints for hits. Marvin wanted something different. He wanted to make music that bled with feeling, not just chart. In early 1970, Whitfield brought Marvin a track he believed would be the next big thing. Marvin listened carefully and said simply, "There's no soul in it." That moment was a turning point. Whitfield exploded. He couldn't fathom Marvin rejecting something so technically sound. But Marvin didn't want calculated brilliance. He wanted freedom. He said, "I'm paving my own way now." That one sentence ended their collaboration. From that day on, the two men never worked in the same room. Notes were passed through assistants. Tracks were left unfinished. They became professional strangers. This struggle for autonomy was central to Marvin's entire journey. When he recorded I Heard It Through the Grapevine, another Whitfield production, he was pushed to sing in high, uncomfortable keys. It strained his voice. It hurt. But it also created a rawness that turned that performance into something unforgettable. Ironically, Berry Gordy rejected Marvin's version twice, choosing instead to release the Gladys Knight and the Pips rendition, which soared. Marvin's version eventually became iconic, but the scars remained. Whitfield's pursuit of intensity had left a mark, and Marvin never forgot how close that song came to being lost. One night in Studio 3 in Detroit, Marvin finally reached a boiling point. He had just wrapped another argument with Whitfield, who refused to allow street sounds or ambient noise into a track. Marvin wanted real-world chaos, sirens, muffled cries, the sound of life outside the studio, because that was his truth. "You're losing grip," Whitfield warned. "Whose grip?" Marvin shot back. "Mine?" That was the night Marvin walked out, not just of the studio, but of the controlled world Motown had created for him. His next move changed everything. That rupture gave birth to What's Going On, a sonic rebellion that defied genre, convention, and Motown's assembly line perfection. When Marvin presented the demo to Whitfield, the producer was stunned. Not because the song lacked polish, but because it dared to show vulnerability. Marvin told him, "I'm not chasing hits. I'm praying out loud." Whitfield didn't argue, neither did Berry Gordy, at least not in the end. After initially calling the track unmarketable, Gordy was forced to release it. The public response was overwhelming. Marvin's gamble had paid off. After that, Marvin was no longer just a hitmaker. He was a movement. His albums took on larger social themes. Let's Get It On explored sensuality. Here, My Dear laid bare his failed marriage, and Midnight Love reflected a man reaching for peace amidst chaos. He wasn't chasing stardom anymore. He was trying to survive it, but creative freedom came at a high cost. Marvin's financial life spiraled out of control. He owed millions, back taxes, legal fees, and alimony. He lost homes in Los Angeles and Europe. By the time he passed in 1984, he was deep in debt, with few assets to his name. And yet, what he left behind, his intellectual property, grew in value over time. The Gaye estate eventually won $7.4 million from Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud, which bore undeniable echoes of Let's Get It On. These royalties, along with licensing deals, posthumous streaming revenue, and estate management, brought his legacy back to financial health. Today, Marvin Gaye's estate is valued between $5 to $9 million, a testament to how his art endured far beyond his lifetime. He never owned a Gulfstream jet or filled garages with Lamborghinis. His wealth was in songs that spoke for the unheard. His watches were likely gifts, his homes modest by celebrity standards. The real treasure was the truth he fought to protect, and the blueprint he left for artists after him. At one point, the legendary Quincy Jones approached Marvin with an offer to collaborate. Quincy imagined a perfect fusion, orchestral elegance, pop precision, and Marvin's soulful vulnerability. But Marvin declined. "Quincy's a genius," he said, "but I don't want perfection. I want chaos." That wasn't a jab, it was a declaration. He didn't want to be boxed in again. Quincy later acknowledged that Marvin's defiance made him one of a kind. He was music's most beautiful ghost, Quincy said. Untouchable, haunting. Their respect for each other never turned into a collaboration, but sometimes the most profound relationships are built in mutual silence. By the time Marvin died, tragically shot by his own father just one day before his 45th birthday, he had become more than a voice. He was a prophet. His pain, his passion, his refusal to conform gave rise to one of the most enduring catalogs in American music. What's Going On is still studied, still cited, still echoed in protest songs, TV series, and spiritual anthems around the globe. So what does Marvin Gaye's story teach us? That artistry costs something. That choosing truth over conformity may alienate the gatekeepers, but it will resonate across time. That emotional honesty is louder than applause. Marvin didn't die with gold-plated mansions or endorsement deals, but he died with his soul intact. And that's why we're still talking about him. His journey wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. He burned bridges, strained friendships, and lost millions. But he gave us more than music. He gave us perspective. He gave us the courage to ask, "What's going on?" and the conviction to demand better answers. In the end, Marvin Gaye's legacy is not just measured by platinum records or chart positions. It's measured by the way his voice still rises in moments of crisis, how it still provides comfort and clarity decades later. He showed us that some voices don't echo, they reverberate. Through generations, through revolutions, through heartbreak. There were no Bentleys, no luxury yachts, just songs, eternal and honest. Marvin's true wealth was artistic control. His life stands as a lesson. Legacy matters more than luxury. Fame fades, but truth lasts. If his voice still echoes for you, that's no accident. It was never just music. It was a man stepping into his full power and asking the world to listen. If this left you thinking differently about the man behind the music, let us know in the comments. Hit that like if Marvin's voice ever gave you goosebumps. And subscribe, because in the next chapter we follow him into exile, into heartbreak, and into the making of one final masterpiece.